my hand.
You do?
Top 10 best.
Bookshelf.
We're on the other
teaching
side
movies
of it.
ever.
Look.
Okay.
Jordan,
So,
I don't want to be in the video.
it's okay.
Okay.
So, point slope, and we now know these different pieces.
Now, which I do this?
Understanding checks? I don't have them printed out ready to go. I didn't know you were coming. I can have them ready to go tomorrow.
Mine.
And we'll start tomorrow. Okay. Okay. So the slope, right? I need to identify these things M. So I'm going to come off to the side and say M equals. How do we calculate M? Right? Boom. So 2 divided by 3. I know, I was very proud of you for that. Times what? Okay. So you're just going with this top point up here. Is that right? Can I use, do I have to use that point?
No. But
He
it
was
is the
saying,
opposite of that point.
Right,
So
because
it's
just like
plus
with x minus h is x minus x1, so I have to use the opposite. It would be x minus a negative 4, which becomes x plus 4. Okay, after that, plus 5.
five.
If I'm using that point, I could use any point up
But
here.
that one doesn't change the last one, right? It just stays the same.
Wait, yes, because it's plus y1. Yeah, we don't have that minus in there. Hopefully this is helping a little bit. Questions, comments, concerns? Okay, so we got to get quicker at these things. That's one of the things, like when you master the content, it moves more quickly. But we need to remember, like the first thing you got to do is, hey, what type of function is it? Whether it's in a graph or in a table, you got to figure out what type of function it is, or in a word problem even. What type of function do we have? From that, you know general equations that you can substitute into, but adjust based on the information you need. All right, so several of y'all have already been asking me today if we're going to have the understanding check. Weren't you here yesterday?
Yeah, I thought it was tomorrow.
Nope.
He said we might have a test. Oh my God.
Originally, there was supposed to be a test tomorrow, and then understanding check today. Actually, understanding check was supposed to be yesterday.
Just about today.
Anyways, listen up. So there's a couple of options. First off, I was not even able to remotely give an understanding check to my first block because of Patriot games. So I will definitely let y'all have the understanding check tomorrow to start class if that's okay with y'all. I assume no one's upset with that option.
Darn.
Get a little bit more time to practice today.
Are we going to delay Richmond?
Okay. Say again.
Are we going to delay Richmond?
Well, tomorrow I will say I think, yes ma'am.
Can I have my juice?
Yeah, it's been sitting there forever for you. I looked at it and I was like, man, I might drink this. I was like, no, I can't do that, Jordan. All right, but once it's over there over a week, you forfeited that juice. All right, so from there though, understanding check tomorrow, and the original plan was test was supposed to be tomorrow. Definitely have to move that test to Monday. Now, I have a couple of options for you though, and I'm gonna let you vote on it as a class. And you can do differently than the first block, but I'll tell you what they decided. So we could take the test Monday, Tuesday, somewhere in there, probably Monday, or we can let the test be the 9 weeks exam.
The 9 weeks exam.
Now, be aware and listen. Yes.
If we don't take that test for 9 weeks exam, like how are 9 weeks exam?
Okay, so if we take the test on Monday, the 9 weeks exam is going to be fairly evenly split between the first unit on statistics and normal distributions. Hold on and listen. And the other half would be the linear, exponential, and quadratic. If we let that test be the 9 weeks exam, I will still have a little bit of the z-scores and normal distributions and probability on the 9 weeks exam. Not much, right? Probably 15 to 20 minutes worth, maybe half an hour's worth. And in the other hour, the majority of it will be focused on linear, exponential, and quadratic functions. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
Is that like the stuff we was doing yesterday? Wait, what were you doing yesterday? Cause I like
Solving quadratic equations.
Yes.
So that would be.
I think
Just
so.
take the understanding check away.
So we would still take the understanding check tomorrow.
Yes.
Now, the other thing to be aware of, so if we let that test be the 9 weeks exam, again, it's gonna be majority of the 9 weeks exam is linear, exponential, quadratic, with a little bit that is the statistics stuff from
Yeah, we
unit
should
one.
do that.
I like that
Okay,
option.
now,
We should
hold
refresh
on
our
and
brains
listen.
on the-
Hold on.
on the first
That's what they
unit.
chose. Say again.
Refresh our brains on the first unit.
Well, so what we're going to do, if we take that option though, is we are actually still a little behind in general. If we take that option, we will take the first 15 to 30 minutes of class each day to review those concepts. But next week, Monday, Tuesday, and then whatever day is not the exam, we will actually use to start the next unit. So we'll still get a little bit of review in there with everything, but we will still use the majority of the time to go into the next
You want me
unit.
to raise our hand system?
Alright, so if you would prefer that the test become the majority of the 9 weeks exam, raise your hand. You don't feel pressure by other people, but majority rules, we will go with that option. Okay, so I will go ahead and tell you this, right? Because of this, I will develop a list of abbreviated concepts that will show up on the 9 weeks exam from the Unit 1 test. So that you know what to focus on off of that test.
Can you make us like a review study guide sheet type thing that we like practice or
Yeah.
It's called your
It's called
understanding
the
check and test.
No,
Okay,
like
I
to
know.
do extra practice.
So what I would actually say, and what I will do is, I'm gonna identify, listen, I'll identify the concepts and maybe questions off the test that would connect to things on the 9 weeks exam, and I would rework the problems from the test. That's what I would recommend doing. What are you gonna say, Mike? Okay, that's what I would do if I were you. Okay, all right, so let's get started with today.
Yay.
All right, so with that also, the understanding check being tomorrow, if you need more practice, I let First Block turn in their homework tomorrow, so I will let you turn in your homework tomorrow as well. I think that is only fair.
The one that's been training yesterday, he lives at home.
Yeah,
But she was actually, I'm sorry, I can't with
Yes.
correct.
Can we just not complain about this at all?
I don't know why we're upset, huh?
I need you to.
What is tomorrow?
You can do old man.
I can do old man?
Yeah.
All you
Isn't
gotta
this
do
what
is
old
dress
man?
really
I was
normally.
gonna say, I'm there.
Suspenders and like.
Oh, suspended. I could go full suit.
Do that.
Do that.
Do
Right
You should wear a full
Right
suit
Right
tomorrow, you
pay.
should.
Huh?
Look, good job.
No, Liv's gonna be calling them here for me.
She does.
Oh my god, I'm gonna be a nurse tomorrow.
See, come on, Mr.
Alright. So, moving from there, we got some math we need to work on and learn. We will continue with Miss Estel's lesson, solving quadratic equations. We'll get to this lesson 6 tomorrow. And it's not going to introduce much of anything new except for the number I. We may get to that a little bit today. So, remember, we're trying to learn how to solve quadratic equations. The big thing is, can we solve a quadratic equation in standard form? No. So the first thing we learned about is we can do what with that standard form? That's the last one. So what's the first one we learned though? Factored, right? If we can factor it, we can use what really important property? Zero product property. Okay? So you got that zero product property because I know that if I'm multiplying stuff and it equals 0, at least one of those factors has to equal 0. That's the big thing there. But can you always factor? No. You can always use the second method of getting the which form? The vertex form. Well, so I'm going to clarify something really quickly. You can always do vertex form, because think about it, doesn't every parabola have a vertex? Yes. So you can always do vertex form, it may not be pretty. Okay? So you can always do vertex form, it just may not always be pretty, but when you get vertex form, you're going to use what to solve that equation? Yeah, AC methods for factoring. Once you get vertex form, you're going to use those inverses to solve. And then the final method, y'all have already been referring to it, is the quadratic formula. That quadratic formula will always work. The nice part is that you have a calculator there. Be careful and be aware you need to know that quadratic formula. I will not be giving it to you. The more times you write out the quadratic formula, the easier it is to remember. Or you can go with Miss Estel's little jingle. I don't care which one you do. That's your choice, right? Like, huh?
I don't remember this one.
Right. I just know my quadratic formula. Yes, ma'am.
You jumped the. Did it turn off?
No.
This
It's also Capri Sun. It doesn't matter if it gets room temp or not.
it mattered today.
Sorry.
Strawberry kiwi is not it.
The girl probably had these things sitting in her cart. Can I don't know if I'm going to throw away the trash.
Can you go dump it out in the water fountain first? Alright, so we have those options. Now, we sorted all of these different equations yesterday. You talked through the different reasons why we might want them, right? So Grace Ann was like, I thought we always wanted, I assume you're going to go with the integer, right?
Yeah.
Negative b divided by 2a, we want to be an integer. Because that makes our life easy, right? And that's the big thing. You can always use vertex form, but we do want to make our life easier overall. And so...
That's how I do it. Like, I try to factor it first, and then if it doesn't factor, I try to.
So let's actually talk about that. So pause for 1 second there. I try to factor it first. What needs to be true in order to factor?
It's equal to 0, 1.
It has to be equal to 0 and has to be able to factor.
So 1, the equation has to equal 0. You have to be able to factor it, which means the factors of a times c have to add up to b. Right? That's what needs to be true in order to factor it. What do we need to consider with the vertex form? With what's an integer though? Don't say it.
A.
The x value, so negative b divided by 2a. That's the thing to remember. If x equals negative b divided by 2a is an integer, that vertex form is really nice and easy. But then if none of those work, that's when I go to the quadratic formula. I'll be honest, I know Miss Estel really likes the quadratic formula, and that's fine. I just feel like there's a lot of places to mess up on the quadratic formula, because there's multiplication, there's subtracting, there's squaring, there's a square root, like there's just a lot of small details that you can mess up on. That's why I don't particularly love using quadratic formula all the time. Whew. Huh? Yeah, you want to go ahead and get out that sheet from yesterday. Get out that sheet from yesterday.
Oh, I got
Yes.
it out.
Alright. So, there's a couple of things that I will point out. First off, none of the equations we're about to look at, don't use those later. I'll explain why in a second. But I do want to point out here, when I look at C and D, which form do we definitely not want to use right away? Why do you say factor?
Because it's the
A times C, C would be, what is it, like 45?
Are there no factors of negative 45 that add up to be 4? Well, 9 and... I might factor it. I mean, maybe, but like the nice part about factoring is even when it's a big number, especially in this one, it's nice and easy. I'm going to use a different marker. Because what do 9x squared and 9x have in common? 9x. So just because it has large numbers doesn't mean it's terrible. Left with x plus 1. What do negative 5x and negative 5 have in common? Negative 5. And I'm left with x plus 1. And so, x plus 1 times 9x minus 5 is equal to 0. Factored form is a beautiful one for this, right? Zero product property. Not the one I was
What are we
thinking.
doing here? This is what I was getting.
Remember, the whole thing is that if we're multiplying things, the only way for us to multiply something and get 0 is if at least one of those factors is 0. That's the zero product property. So you just set them equal to 0 and solve. Yes, Grace Ann.
Before you wrote what you just wrote, if the question was to rewrite the equation.
As in factored form?
Yes.
Well, oh yeah, if you just want an equivalent form, it's this. I'm asking you to solve, you need to know what x is equal to. Okay, so not factoring. The factoring works well. What method would not work well?
Vertex.
Yeah, do you want to deal with negative 2/9 for that vertex?
That looked fun.
That does not look fun.
How do you know Vertex Form is gonna be good by just looking at it?
Because-
I knew it was gonna be a fraction.
Right, that's exactly it. Negative b divided by 2a. Knowing that I have a 4 and a 9, I knew that I would get a fraction out of that. Similarly over here, if I take negative 7 and I divide it by this, do you want to deal with a fraction?
Dude, that's a weird.
So it's just looking at those kinds of details, and you can take the time to write it out, but, I mean, writing it out's not that hard. It's just one extra step, total like 5 seconds to show and evidence that you understand why
So you get
not
4
to.
plus.
Well, we have to
Get that
explain
4 plus.
everything on your test, so we waste on time on one thing.
You do have to be
take it away from
strategic.
something
Yeah,
else.
you have to find the thing you want.
Yeah, you do have to be strategic, I agree. Okay, but again, vertex form would not be the way I go. You might be tempted to do the quadratic formula, but you also might want to look to see if you can factor it first. Miss Estel, did she talk about any of these yesterday?
We got to like and then we halfway through.
No, we did all those.
We
Did we not do
skipped
Yes,
L?
we did, because
You
she.
skipped which one?
L.
L?
Oh, is that?
Wait, that's an, oh, that is an L.
My bad. Well,
Yeah,
So y'all didn't do that one at all? Okay.
No.
No, we did.
I know we didn't, Grayson. I know we did not do
You
that.
just said we didn't do anything, I said we
We did J
I
and
just
L.
said
We
it.
didn't do
Ah.
She
L.
Okay.
did I after walking like
That's L.
half an hour.
Okay. I will say this, the point with L here is honestly, any method will work.
We can factor it.
-1 times -45 gives me 45. So -3 and -15,
Yes.
right? So you can factor it. X equals negative b divided by 2a. You get 18 divided by -2. So you can do vertex form, and you can always use quadratic formula. So it's your choice on something like that. So you would want to note, hey, you can use any method. I chose blank. Yes, Clay.
So if it was just x squared, it'd be a positive 2, right?
Right. Yeah.
'Cause-
But it's an understood -1 x
yeah,
squared.
so like that's what I'm saying. So then it'd equal just 9 if it was just a regular x squared, right?
Yes. Yes. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I'm not understanding check if there's multiple, if we could use like vertex or quadratic or factor so that we can.
Just yeah, a quick note of I can use any method here. I prefer this
What
one.
about like?
That might boost it in my.
Because if I don't understand, if I know which one it goes in.
Sure.
You might get a 1 minus for that.
Well, and here's the thing.
Zero minus.
Hold on a second. You recognizing, hey, I can use this method is still evidence, but there's always at least 2 methods you can use. And at the very least, does anyone know one strategy that's not vertex form or factored form or even quadratic formula that will always show you the roots?
Endorses yet?
Can you graph it and identify the roots? Yeah, so that's always an option as well.
Can we use our test option like graph it?
It won't score you very high.
You just said we could
If
do
you're
it.
struggling
Well,
that
yeah,
bad,
if
I would say if you're struggling that bad, is that still evidence that you
it's
understand
better
how
than
to
zero,
solve it?
to be honest.
Right, like that could potentially, I will say this, if you look at the score of a 1+, you have the correct
It's like a lot.
answers, but there's no relevant details. So if you graph it, that's not showing me you understand these different forms, but it still at least shows me that you understand what the roots
That's like
are.
a last resort. If you're struggling.
Exactly, sure, yeah.
It's back.
And also something I would always check myself on. Alright, so here's what I need you to do now. Flip over the graphic organizer that we developed yesterday.
I didn't know this was
Yep.
on.
We had plans all the way through. Okay, can I see this really quickly? So on the back side, you will notice that next to the first 2 equations, it talks about which method to solve. Quadratic formula, there we go. And then the next 2, it has vertex form with inverses. And then the last one is factoring. What you want to do on this is pick 2 equations from the quadratic formula side and use the quadratic formula. So we didn't tell you which equations to use. you put two equations there from your quadratic formula, and you work them out, solve for x using the quadratic formula. Under the vertex form, again, pick two of your equations from the vertex form section. The only request I have is, I was like, it's not necessarily wrong, just different ways. Do not do G here, because G is already in vertex form. I want you to get practice converting it to vertex form. Does that make sense? Well, you need to be able to do that for the assessment, don't you? Okay, so do not do G here under vertex form, but you as a group actively collaborate, choose two equations to do with quadratic formula, vertex form, and then factoring. What are your questions about those directions? Going once. Going twice. Let's get to work.
So, I'm definitely doing factoring.
You just gonna be that way?
It'll be.
If you want so that you're listening to you can sit back there while they work.
No, because I want to work. Let me have a question.
Okay.
Okay, it says below the mean, and we're at 6 hours, so it's 0.6. So would that be like what?
I mean, yeah.
Will you go 6?
Well, so 6 hours with a standard deviation. Well, I mean, it just says between one standard deviation below the mean and one standard deviation above the mean.
Right, so I was thinking that.
Oh, what's the mean though?
Am I right?
Read it again.
I don't think we did the same thing.
Oh, clearly not. It says a standard deviation of 0.6 hours.
Oh.
Where does it talk about the mean? Oops, up here. Mean battery life is.
At least it's not calculated.
Accurate. That would over.
Yeah,
Oh, I didn't tell you, I'm so sorry. I feel like I've been leaving you.
I will say this. One of my suggestions would be to either do I or O. Those are good ones to think about. According to small detail, you want to pay attention to with I. You don't have to do both of them. I would just do one of them and then pick a different one.
You don't know what you
I had a question.
I have a question.
Yeah, you had a question mark. Is it the one that you did?
Which method are you using right now? Why'd y'all put that one under quadratic formula?
Okay, should we run
So y'all put that under quadratic formula? Why were y'all thinking quadratic formula? Especially if they were thinking factoring. I mean, I'm not saying one way or the other. I'm just saying, so like, why were y'all thinking factoring? So like, when we settle a disagreement, we need evidence, right? So what's your evidence for using factoring? We don't want to say it looks really easy. Like, what makes it? What details are there to say, hey, factoring might be a good method? It will work. Okay. Use more details. What's 1 times 10? 10, right? And so what's the evidence that AC method works? What do you say? 5 times 2 is 10, and 5 plus 2 is 7, right? That's full evidence. Does that make sense? Like explaining why it works. But that's what I might think is, I would probably reserve that for factoring. Now, can you use the quadratic formula? Sure, but I'm going to use factoring for something like that. Yes, please work together, check in with each other, and make sure you all get the same answers. Okay? Does he hand over here? Solving. Yeah, you are solving. Good question. So which one? You're an x squared plus 12x plus 20 for vertex? Okay, go ahead and solve it then. You're just identifying one? Oh, that one's equal to what, negative 32 or negative 12? Right, you're right, negative 12. So make sure you include that, negative 12. So A is,
I would rather Vertex.
Wait, what's
why do you want to do vertex? There you go, have your evidence. Do you want to do that?
No.
You good? Yes, negative 6 divided by 4, not negative 6x.
I think yes, A No.
Good, it looks like we all realized we need to add 12 to get started on that one. Okay, so what are y'all doing at this point? I will point this out, you know that you can just put everything underneath the square, underneath the radical into the calculator all at once, right? Like I'm okay with you just typing out 12 squared minus 4 times 1 times 30. Everything underneath the radical? Yeah. I need you all to understand, I don't give two dumps about whether you can multiply, add, subtract, like I was teach you algebra 2. So you can just put everything underneath the radical all at the same time. Because I mean, like, you're just going to put that into the calculator, aren't you? Okay.
Mr. King,
Yes, ma'am.
so,
I'm here.
okay, so actually,
There you go. Uh-huh.
so my question would be,
I can't tell you that, but I will point, if you, so, because you can use it. See right here where you wrote about the empirical rule? So, are you able to use the empirical rule? So, one thing to clarify, you can always use z-scores, you can't always use empirical rules. Remember, the reason why you know it's 34 and 34 is because there's symmetry around the mean, right? And that's what 1 standard deviation below and 1 standard deviation above. That might be something to consider here. One thing I will point out is this is not calculated, right? Have you been using your calculator?
I'm just gonna see if I get the same thing.
Oh, it's not calculator, right?
which one is D?
If you're using z-scores, don't you need a calculator? Just trying to, you know. By the way, you do need the z-score table. Let me go ahead and do that for you.
Oh, God. Oh, no, I remember when you showed me that, but I don't remember. Don't bring it up.
Clear your book off your desk, please.
Well, that's what we put.
Hold on a second.
We've already put
I don't know this long.
You need to be careful about copying your details down when you write it below. Everything here is set up correctly. Did you write every detail from here on here?
I didn't have the, I'm trying to factor.
The plus or minus? Here, is this written out just like up here? Like start at the very beginning, right? X equals negative 13 plus or minus square root. And one thing I'll point out is this. These are being multiplied. Maybe you missed me say this, but you can just put everything underneath the radical into the calculator all at once. You don't have to show that step by step. Yeah, I care about do you know how to solve a quadratic equation, which means use that formula. I don't care if you know how to square and subtract and multiply. Yes, please do. For your
That's not
always gotta justify a little bit. One thing to clarify, doesn't it say 1 standard deviation below and 1 standard deviation above?
Well, you can put it in the calculator.
Making your life harder than this.
All you can put is everything.
I feel like that's a life motto of my students. Just, you know, just want to make this harder than it has to be. So negative 13 plus or minus the square root of 41.
Oh, wait, okay, so negative.
13.
Would it be over 4?
So be careful. is only this being divided by 4? Or is the whole thing, is being divided by 4? And I usually center it. Now, can you get a really nice number out of that or no? Take the square root of 41. Tell me what you see. And yeah, it is a negative 13. Obviously. Just kidding.
What would it be for?
Square root's the inverse of the square. That's a really ugly decimal, isn't it? We're going to talk about that later. If you get an ugly decimal, don't sweat it. Now, I will say, yeah, you would stop there. Now, I will say you may want to check your answers, which remember we looked at that yesterday on the graphic. Did you already graph? Is it?
X.
Okay, that was just there from before.
6.4.
No, the square root of 41 is 6.403. I'm saying, well, you also need to do negative 13 plus or minus. I'm just saying stop here. That's the answer. Right. Now, you may want to check your answer. So what you would want to do is negative 13 plus the square root of 41 all divided by 4. And then remember how we graphed these yesterday? Graph it and see if that's one of your roots. You can also do the negative 13 minus and check to see if that's your other root. Yeah, you're done. That's the solution. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's not easy, but negative 3.
I'm just, because here's the thing, those are your roots. Check your answer on your graphing calculator, but it's an irrational number. I'm not going to ask you to write all that out. So check your answers and move on to the next problem.
Yeah, I can see the process.
Hey, 144 minus 128. I was so confused because you didn't have your square root for all of that. I was really confused what you're doing. Really quickly, I do want to point this out, just so y'all are aware. Once you get this set up, I'm okay with you putting all of this underneath the radical into the calculator. I don't. Yeah, like I wouldn't even do this 2 different steps. Like I would just put all of that in the calculator because, as I told everyone else, it's dumb that you can use 12 squared minus 4 blah blah blah. Calculator's great for that. I care if you know how to use the quadratic formula. You know what I mean?
Okay, so you would try to.
Which one's I? So, can we, if we plug in, that's not I.
So, A.
We plug it in to the quadratic. The B is gonna be the opposite.
Why couldn't we do capital letters instead of lowercase?
You gotta put me on there, this goes not long.
Oh, yeah, because
I'm okay with it.
There's lowercase letter.
Hold up. Don't you dare write that like that. That's going to cause you so much confusion. Don't.
Hey, can we do the?
Don't write. Don't. Just don't, please. Okay. When you write out the quadratic formula,
I can see you
you
doing
write out the
it.
quadratic formula.
Look, tell her.
When you
Oh my
write
God,
out the
we gotta
quadratic
go
formula,
today.
one, always put a fraction order as horizontal.
Right?
Right? Because right now it looks like you're only dividing this negative 15 by 4. You're dividing everything by 2. And when you write out your quadratic formula, write out your quadratic formula in general like this first, and then substitute in negative b plus or minus needs to be set up like that. The square root of b squared minus 4ac.
I'm sorry.
I promise you, that's going to save you so much heartache. That will cause you mistakes. Okay? The other thing to be aware of is, right, you already did the opposite of b, that's 7, that's good. But right here, if you put that into calculator, it's going to give you a negative 41. When you substitute values in, put parentheses around this. From there, one of the things would be a negative 7 squared. From there, I do want you to be able to be aware of this. I don't care
if you know how to do negative 7 squared minus 4ac, because that's not what I'm teaching you. I'm teaching you how to use the quadratic formula to solve a quadratic equation.
Yeah, my dad got
That is put everything underneath the radical in the calculator. So just put all of that in the calculator.
My
Okay?
stepbrother's name is Brady, and he's
And then just give it that square root is of.
Brady's my dad.
Exactly like it looks like. Parentheses around -7. No. I said everything underneath the radical. Just put what's underneath the radical in the calculator, and don't even put the square root in there. Just put every stuff underneath.
Oh.
So put parentheses -7 squared minus 4 times 2 times -15.
Mister,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
I put it on the same thing. I erased my answer for this. And put it this.
Okay, well copy that down there.
Because I explained it all there.
Slow down and pay attention to your details. Okay, move on to the second equation. Come on.
They're harassing.
No,
I think it's time.
she's making stuff up.
I know Jordan likes to lie about people. She likes to lie about me too.
What?
Mr. Kenny's the worst teacher in the world. He's terrible. That's what I heard you say.
When?
I'm just giving you a hard time.
I know.
Mr. Johnson, I was.
I did tell him I'm gonna stress me
I
out.
believe you. Hold on 1 second, I'll be there, Maury. What's up? So how's it going? Go, feeling good?
Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times
Well, can you take the square root of 224? Then leave it.
Bradford Jennings.
Say it.
Name is Bradford Jennings.
What's the opposite of b, isn't it? It's negative b plus or minus the square root.
The third.
Where's your
I know
equation?
you're mad. Mr. Kenny.
Bradford Jennings is the third.
It wasn't Bradford Jennings there.
I said Jimmy. That's why you're wrong. It says Jimmy.
Okay, so, okay. So then 15 is positive.
Reflex me.
Letters.
Okay, you want to find out about how the meals when we get them white?
I get it.
If you go over it, it makes it look like you're going down. Yes.
Or we can write it as.
Yeah, because my mom.
Wait,
She has
are we
one.
on this one?
Okay, my mom. She's like,
What's this powder? Either that.
she has.
Wait, so where's the
I don't want to just
What's the worst that can happen? It's going to fall under some.
Oh, yeah, so you're gonna have to do that.
If you have jail.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're raising.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, so let's talk about a couple of things I want to point out because, hey, group 3, over here, just for a second. Because I want y'all to see something that I'm seeing out of y'all that's not necessarily bad, but I do want you to consider. First off, this is a quadratic equation, x squared plus 16x plus 64 equals 0 that I saw at least one group use the quadratic formula on. And there's two things I want to talk about with this one, okay? So I'll start with that detail. For whichever group it was who did this, use the quadratic formula, negative 16 plus x equals, and I'm not writing the entire negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a for the sake of time moving forward, but write that down every time. Write down the quadratic formula to help make sure that you substitute it correctly. Square root of 16 squared minus 4 times 1 times 64, all divided by 2 times 1. For the group that did this, what did you get at the end? Was it y'all? Who did this one? Group 5 did this? You got -8. And I want y'all to hear me and pay attention to this very clearly, because this is a possibility. You said -8 and only -8, right? How many x-intercepts do we usually have, though? We usually have 2. So how in the world do we only have 1 x-intercept? Not at this side. That's actually a good idea, but we don't have any there sideways. Any ideas? How do we have, so they got x equals -8 at the end. How do you have a parabola that only has 1 x-intercept? Okay, so can anybody come up here and just sketch out any parabola, not necessarily this one, just a parabola that only has 1 x-intercept?
Isn't that what, can't you just do a line? That's all supposed to cost one time.
Well, a linear one would, but what are all these types of functions? Quadratics. Huh? But what we're saying is they only got -8. Like, if I remember correctly, okay? They did do the plus or minus, because I believe, if I remember correctly, what's underneath here is 0. Is that right? Was it the square root of 0? Am I remembering that correctly? Yeah? So everything underneath the radical became a 0. So notice in that case, if I add or subtract 0, I still just get -16. It's only one number. I get -16 divided by 2, which is -8. That's a possibility. So, did that not make you think what in the world is going on here? A little bit. How can we check, maybe, to see what that might look like? Maybe? But say it again. Can we graph this? Yeah? Because here's the thing, right? Like, there is a way that this can happen, but that should make you pause and think, okay, what does this look like on the graph? Because that's a little odd. Alright, so I'm going to graph. So x squared plus 16x plus 64?
Yeah. Uh-oh.
How is that? So what's happening?
It's just the vertex.
The vertex is on the x-axis. That's how that happened. The vertex was on the x-axis. So how many x-intercepts are there? Only 1. That's how that happened. Does that make sense? Okay. Now I do want to point this out. What kind of number is this? Is this a whole number, a natural number, irrational, rational? It's an integer, which is a type of rational. So clarify, whole numbers are only 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Integers are all those whole numbers and their opposites. So the positive and negative versions of those. And an integer is a type of rational number. If you missed this before, if you get a rational root, you could have factored it. I want y'all to look at your answers again. Did any of y'all get fractions or whole or integers at the end of using your quadratic formula?
Yes.
Yes. Every group did, I think. Okay? That means you could have factored it. When I look up here, what are factors of 64, right? 1 times 64. That add up to 16, 8 and 8.
Yes.
So we want to pay attention and identify the most efficient method. And so they both have an x plus 8. I factor that out, I'm left with x and plus 8. So notice we have 2 roots, but they are the same.
It would be the same as.
Right, remember, that's the thing. That's standard form, this is just factored form of that same thing. And if I multiply something by itself, can't I just rewrite that as x plus 8 squared is equal to 0?
Yes.
And that would be the vertex form. And the vertex would be -8, comma, 0. Right, so all those things are connected. That's how that works. If you remember in the quadratic formula, wasn't there a point when we took a square root of 0? Is that what y'all saw, square root of 0? So that's where all this is coming from. So I want you to see those connections, but more importantly, I really want you to pay attention to this. Think about that factoring first, because that's going to be easier than using the quadratic formula in something like this. Okay? Let's talk about this 2x squared minus 7x equals 15 quickly. And by the way, you don't have to change it. I just want you to see that there could have been a more efficient strategy on that one. First step here with this 2x squared minus 7x equals 15. What do I need to do? Okay, so remember we need the quadratic equation to equal 0. So how am I going to do that?
Subtract 15.
So 2x squared minus 7x minus 15 equals 0. Okay, I think a couple of groups did this one. When you use the quadratic formula, at the end you got x equals what? What kind of roots are those, or what kind of numbers are those? Well, that one's an integer, but that one is a rational number. So remember what the word rational means is a ratio. Is that a ratio of integers? Right, so it's a rational number. Most of your irrational numbers are going to be square roots that give you really ugly decimals. We'll talk about that in a second. But notice right here, -3/2 and 5 are both rational numbers, so what could we have done with this problem? We could have factored it out. 2 times -15 is -30. What factors of -30 add up to -7? I think one of them needs to be negative though, right?
-10.
You could have factored that one, right? So look at your numbers again and check it, because, and I think that's what threw some of us off, there was another one that was equal to 12 maybe? If you check that one though, it was factorable as well. Make sure once you get it into standard form equals 0 that you check that a times c to make sure can I factor it or not. Questions, comments, concerns through that one? Okay? Now if you did 4x squared plus 16x plus 2, and I know group 3 did, I think other groups did as well, but rational or irrational? What did y'all get at the end of this? X equals what? So I will point this out. Square root of 224. Type that into the calculator. Square root of 224 in the calculator.
14.96.
And that decimal doesn't look pretty, does it? If you go up and you highlight that number and hit enter and bring it down, I think it gives you an even bigger decimal. And it does not repeat, it does not terminate. If you have the square root of a non-perfect square, it will always be irrational. If you get something that is irrational, it's okay to stop there. Okay? Now, personally though, I wouldn't have used quadratic formula here. Now, it's irrational, so could I have factored it? No. But look at it. That gives me an x-intercept, or not an x-intercept, an x value of the vertex of -2, right? Negative b divided by 2a. Isn't that pretty easy to substitute in? And so I would probably still use a calculator. And I will say this, guys, if you show this substituted in, and you're on a calculator portion of the test, could you just put that into the calculator? Okay, do that for me really quickly. Just typing that into the calculator. Figure out what the k would be, because that's what we're finding out here, right? This is h, I still need k.
How are you so fast?
Look at the calculator. Like no one's doing that in their head, I promise.
Like how do you process all that so quickly?
Ooh, weird.
Yeah, it's like you just like, I don't know, you go quick.
I've been doing this since I was 14.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
He's like, what, 42?
At least 28.
I am at least 28.
What are
You
you,
are correct.
32?
31.
Oh.
Okay, so I have a vertex form now. Yes, Jordan.
I'm done.
Okay. Oh, with that portion?
That was super.
Okay, I'll look at it in just a second. Okay, so we have our h and we have our k, which means we can do vertex form now. If you need to, write out the vertex form to help you think through it. So what is A?
4.
So remember, you can always get A from the equation if you started out with that equation. Times X plus 2. Okay, don't forget that squared.
Minus 14.
Minus 14 is equal to 0. And now I can use my inverses. Right. 4 times x plus 2 squared equals 14. Use that reciprocal. So I'm going to pull this work over to here. Squared equals, if you put that in the calculator, you would just get 7/2. Don't stress about putting this in the calculator. I'm just showing the work to show the inverses. I want you to see one thing at the very end. Okay? So x equals -2 plus or minus square root of 7/2. When I look at that, not very pretty, right? Is that the same thing that Amari had originally? Any guesses? Maybe? Why don't you type in -16 plus the square root of 224 divided by 8 in the calculator. Let's see what you get.
How do you do plus or minus?
You don't. You have to do it as two separate ones. So you do -16 plus the square root of 224 divided by 8. Make sure you put parentheses around this.
Was that equal or instead of what it is?
Say again.
Was that more? Was it more than this? Oh my God. I'm trying to leave right now.
Sorry. Okay. Well, you just need to divide by -1. Or multiply by -1. Alright, so what do we get from -16 plus square root of 224 all divided by 8? Somebody? Anybody?
Mine's not giving me supposed to be.
Mine says -0.12917.
Yeah.
I didn't know.
That might be right.
0.129.
The one's -3.870.
Why is mine 0.129?
Yeah, I got the same thing.
It's because it's negative right here. I don't know why it's there.
Let me see.
Does this look right?
Oh, what you probably did is, when you put, I don't know then.
I didn't put 2
I didn't put it too.
Well then, okay, if that happens, go up, hit enter, and then just delete that one. Guys, y'all gotta remember, you can just go up, highlight what you originally did, hit enter, and, no, there was supposed to be one negative.
No, I was on the second one.
Yeah. So go up, highlight the expression you just typed in, and fix it. Like, check the expression you typed in, but you can always go up, highlight it, hit enter, bring it down, and update it. Okay, really quickly, check -2 plus the square root of 7/2. Was it the same value? Okay. So I just want you to see, do they both work? 100%, right? So you can use both methods. Don't forget to take the time to check yourself, because here's the thing. If you take an extra 30 seconds to type that graph in, so 4x squared, it might be an extra minute for all of this, plus 2, and you check the x-intercepts, so analyze 0, hey look, was I supposed to have -0.129? Yes, and more importantly, and hear me very clearly on this, let's say you had messed up. Let's say you got the wrong answer. Would you be giving me more information on your understanding if you say, hey, I know this is wrong, but I don't have time to go fix it?
Yes.
Yeah. By going to the graphing calculator and checking that really quickly, then and telling me that, hey, I messed up, but I don't have time to fix it, cool. That tells me that you understand this a lot. Keep that in mind. The rubric is not giving you points or taking away points. It is based on What level of evidence do I see of your understanding? That's important. So check your answers. It's worth it. Huh? Yes. Well, obviously only on graphing or calculator portions, but I would never put something like this on the non-calculator. If you remember the understanding check, right, the forms of quadratics, stuff like that would be on the non-calculator. Yeah. All right, so let's get back to work. From what I can tell, we're mostly doing pretty well on quadratics. I do want you to move on. Let's do the vertex form now. If you finish the vertex form equations, move on to the factoring. So let's move on to that vertex form. Oh, then y'all move to the quadratic formula. Remember, it's negative 1 times x, so divide by a negative 1. And then remember, you can check your answers out. Oh, and I would probably just graph it really quickly. So what Grace was talking about is you can't leave this negative x, but that's understood to be negative 1 times x. So you could multiply by negative 1 or divide by negative 1. Does that make sense? Deja, you on the phone? What's up, Kennedy? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to get this into vertex form? I was saying, can you use inverses right away? Yes. So this one's a little difficult, but think about it as 1 times x minus 0 squared minus 49 is equal to 0. Yeah, that's what x squared minus 49 is. So like x minus 0, isn't that x?
Are we supposed to use that?
And we have 1 x squared, so a is 1, h is 0, k is negative 49. That's already in vertex form.
Yeah.
You can use inverses right away, can't you? If you can already use inverses, it's already in vertex form.
Oh, I got you.
Okay? Now, you can also see that as standard form, it's one of those weird situations, but because it's just x squared minus 49 equals 0, you can use the inverses right away. So y'all will definitely want to look at your second one.
I was just multiplying this
I'm always like, I'm rocking and rolling, I need y'all to catch up, but slow down, let them work, and then we'll check with each other.
So, let's do that one.
Yeah.
This is the last thing.
Why? Because I didn't.
Look here, look here, look here, look here.
And that's wrong.
Remember, you want a relative frequency. So you want that frequency in relation to the whole thing.
Yeah, how does that solve?
The answer is no.
I did it last week.
I'm going to take this back. You're going to come in tomorrow. You're going to work on this tomorrow. Look over your notes. I'm trying to look out for you. Wait, what did you say? What method are you trying to use there? Isn't that the vertex section though?
You want your
Yeah.
Where are we going on this?
7? What is that? Next Friday? Continue with our next unit or taking the exam, one of the two. Exams are next Thursday, Friday. That's Wednesday. On Wednesday? Oh, sorry. Be careful with your details. Look right there again.